We tend to think of foundational religious texts as these static, unchanging things, right? Like a single message delivered perfectly from the start. But what if one of the most influential books in human history, the New Testament, is actually an archive? What if it's a collection of documents that tells this incredible story of a movement fighting for its very life and having to radically change its message just to survive? And really, that's the big question we're digging into, because the story of early Christianity is nothing short of a masterclass in adaptation. It's about what happens when a small, apocalyptic sect faces one existential crisis after another. The choice becomes pretty simple: innovate or die. All right, so let's set the scene. Picture it. We're in the chaotic, messy decades of the late first century. That initial spark, that first burst of enthusiasm from Jesus' earliest followers is about to slam headfirst into a very, very harsh reality. This was an absolute catastrophe. I mean, on multiple levels. The temple, the very center of Jewish life and identity, is just gone, rubble. And just as importantly, the core prediction that Jesus was going to return any day now to kick off the end of the world, well, it hadn't happened. For a faith built entirely on that promise, this was a moment of profound make-or-break crisis. So the first huge problem they had to solve was basically a marketing problem. Seriously, how do you sell a crucified Jewish Messiah to a sophisticated, non-Jewish Greco-Roman audience? The original pitch just wasn't working. It wasn't resonating at all. Now, what's so wild is how fast this evolution happened. In the span of about 20 years, the whole concept of who Jesus is completely transforms. If you look at the Gospel of Mark, written around 70 CE, Jesus is powerful for sure, but he's also very human. He's the Son of God because of what he does, his actions, his baptism. But fast forward to John's Gospel, and wow, he's been elevated into something else entirely. He's now a divine, cosmic being who existed with God before creation itself. And let's be clear, this wasn't just some small theological adjustment. Introducing the concept of the Logos, the Word, was a strategic masterstroke. It tapped right into Greek philosophy, using universal language that any educated person in the Roman Empire could understand and respect. This single move transformed Jesus from a local, Jewish figure into a universal, cosmic principle. It allowed Christianity to get on the big stage and compete in the Roman world's marketplace of ideas. Okay, so they started to figure out the messaging problem, but there was another issue, this ticking clock in the background, the apocalypse that never came. This was the second huge crisis for the early church. You have to understand, these first Christian communities lived in a state of constant, high-alert expectation. When the Apostle Paul wrote his letters, he was talking to people he fully believed would still be alive to see Christ's return. Their whole way of life was built on this idea that the end was just around the corner. I mean, you can just imagine the growing anxiety. A whole generation was passing. The original believers were dying of old age. And the critics and scoffers were starting to mock them, right? So where is this coming he promised you? The entire credibility of the faith was hanging by a thread. And their solution really came in 3 stages. First, they had to acknowledge the crisis of faith. The non-arrival of the Parousia, that's the fancy term for the promised second coming, was causing a lot of doubt. So stage 2, theological reinterpretation. Later texts in the New Testament, like the book of 2 Peter, start to reframe the whole idea of the delay. They argue that, with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years. Basically, they're saying, let's just be patient. And that leads to stage 3, a major pivot. Instead of constantly looking up at the sky, they started looking around, building a community that could last for the long haul. That meant creating church structures, defining rules, and setting up leadership. And this is the key takeaway, right here. The radical, world-ending message had to be domesticated. It had to be tamed to ensure the community could actually survive long-term. The focus shifted from getting ready for the end of the world to building a durable church in the world. Now, the third massive challenge was a people problem. The movement was suddenly attracting a ton of non-Jews, or Gentiles, and this created this huge internal fight. Did a Gentile have to become a Jew first, follow all the laws, to be a follower of the Jewish Messiah? And this is where the Apostle Paul drops his theological bombshell, justification by faith. It was a complete game changer. He basically argued that the old rules, things like circumcision and dietary laws, were no longer the barrier to entry. All that mattered now was faith in Christ. This one idea blew the doors wide open to the entire non-Jewish world. What's so fascinating is seeing how all these adaptations happened at the same time. This timeline lays it out perfectly. It all kicks off around 50 CE with Paul, who's all about bringing in Gentiles and expects the world to end any minute. Just 20 years later, Mark is writing for a community in crisis, giving them a more relatable, human Messiah. Then by 90 CE, you get John elevating Jesus to this cosmic logos to appeal to that broader Roman culture. And finally, as you push past the year 100, the later letters are all about building the church for the long haul. It's not one change, it's a dynamic, multi-front evolution. So, how did all these competing ideas, these different solutions to these massive crises all come together? Well, they were collected, edited, and assembled into what we now call the New Testament. In a way, the book itself ended up codifying the arguments that won. This table just spells out the core conflict perfectly. On one side, you have the original Jerusalem church. For them, this was a movement within Judaism. You had to follow Jewish law. On the other side, you've got Pauline Christianity, which was designed for Gentiles. And as you can see from the outcome, Paul's vision is the one that won. It just had a better strategy for growth in the Roman Empire. 70 years. Just think about that. That's the rough time frame for this entire messy, brilliant evolution to play out. From Paul's urgent apocalyptic letters to the later writings focused on building a permanent institution. This wasn't some quick change. It was a generation-long process of survival and total reinvention. And that really brings us to the most important takeaway. The New Testament isn't a book with a single unified voice. It's an archive. It's a library that preserves the arguments, the conflicts, the dead ends, and the ultimate synthesis that allowed a tiny Jewish sect to grow into a world religion. It literally documents its own evolution. And that leaves us with a pretty cool question to chew on, doesn't it? If this much change and adaptation is visible right here in the New Testament, what other incredible histories of conflict, survival, and evolution are waiting for us, hidden in plain sight, inside the other foundational texts that have shaped our world?